let me just say a few words of introduction. So this is a recent paper came out in February of this year as both a BIS working paper and a Bank of Mexico working paper. And this is a paper I like a lot. This is, and I wanted to share this with our SEACEN members. Because I think there were lessons in here for us, and I think this is an important topic, and I think it's an important paper, and that deserves a wide audience, because of the practicality of what the authors do. So there were 4 authors in alphabetical order. There's Ana Aguilar, Carlo Alcaraz, who actually is an old acquaintance of mine. So Carlo and I met, I won't embarrass either of us. Carlo and I met a few years ago, some time ago at the Bank of England. And third author is Claudia Ramirez, and we have Sid Rodriguez Perez. Ana is from the BIS Mexico City office, and Carlo, Claudia, and Sid are from the Bank of Mexico. The reason I like this paper so much is that the authors estimate slack in Mexico's informal labor market. So as Carlo will tell you, Mexico has a large informal labor market, which makes any estimation of things like slack or even the NAIRU quite challenging, given the large unregulated sector. So I hope I'm kind of summarizing it without giving too many spoilers away, but the authors come up with a method of estimating labor market slack in the presence of a large informal sector. The argument being that the unemployment rate by itself is just a very poor measure of slack. Anyway, I'll sort of leave it at that and let Carlo explain the kind of details. But I like it because the method is or could be a convenient tool for monetary policy, particularly in countries in emerging economies with a significant informal labor market, as is the case for many of our SEACEN members. Anyway, let me thank all of them, Ana, Carlo, Claudia, and Sid for well, let me thank Ana and Carlo for being here, and Claudia and Sid being here in spirit. And I think the reason Ana is here is so that Carlo can deflect any difficult questions to another person, which would be my sort of strategy. But Carlo, over to you. You've got 90 minutes in total. I don't know how long it will take. And I don't know whether you want to stop at times or for questions, or if not, I will reappear on screen if there are questions as a sort of subtle signal that we may have a question or two. So whatever you prefer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ole. Thank you very much, SEACEN Center, for inviting us to present this. For us, it's very important to share this experience, to get a comment from you, and always it's very nice to change ideas with staff from other central banks. So for me, it's okay if you ask any question, and we have 1.5 hours, so we have plenty of time to answer questions or any doubt, any comment that you have, any part of the presentation, feel free to ask. So I'm going to present NAIRU and informality in the Mexican labor market. As Ole said, this is a joint work with Ana Maria Aguilar, Claudia Ramirez, and Sid Rodriguez. And all the opinions and point of view in this presentation are author's responsibility and don't necessarily represent the institutional view of the Mexican Central Bank. Okay. So, as everybody knows, labor market slack is a very important indicator for monetary policy. The challenge is that a very important challenge to measure the labor market slack is that we need to estimate the NAIRU, that is the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. This NAIRU is not observed, and therefore this represents a challenge from the econometric point of view. Additionally, the estimation of the NAIRU in a country like Mexico is more complicated because in Mexico exists a very important fraction of the labor force that is informal, and this also and the informal labor would be also a measure of labor market under-utilization. So therefore, in a developing country like Mexico, estimating the NAIRU is even more challenging. So there is plenty of evidence that in Mexico, informal labor market is more flexible in relative terms to the formal labor, and this has implications on the labor market. For example, during the recession, the wage flexibility in the formal market allows it to absorb individuals that could not find formal employment. Therefore, informal sector absorbs workers that would be potentially unemployed during recession. So, in Mexico, there is not labor insurance. If the workers lost a job during the recession, they don't have any alternative source of income, and also because many poor families, they don't have the option to be unemployed. Unemployed in Mexico is like a luxury. Many people cannot afford to be unemployed. Therefore, during a crisis, we see a lot of transitions from formal employment to informal employment. And we see that the informality rate increases during the recession. Therefore, informality rate is countercyclical. And given these characteristics, or let's say, it is possible that the unemployment rate does not fully reflect the labor market slack. Therefore, we propose in this work, we propose a new indicator of labor market underutilization that includes a measure of informality. And this new indicator, we have the informal, we have the unemployed workers, and we add to these unemployed workers informal wage employed workers. So we expand the measure of the labor market underutilization that normally is unemployed. We expand the unemployed to include the informal wage workers. So we estimate the NAIRU over time using both. We use both the traditional unemployment rate with the labor market slack, using the traditional unemployment rate that we call UT, and the augmented unemployment rate that takes into account informality. We call U extended or NAIRU informal. And we saw these two series of employment underutilization, we model inflation dynamics based on the Phillips curve. We estimate the labor market slide using 4 models. The first model is a recursive estimation. All these models are like standard in the literature. First of all, we use a recursive estimation in which NAIRU is estimated from a Phillips curve that is assumed to change over time. And we estimate 3 models state space specifications that allow for more flexibility in the dynamics properties of the NAIRU. So first of all, we estimate the Phillips curve in which the NAIRU follows a random walk. Secondly, we estimate a Phillips curve in which the NAIRU follows a random walk and the unemployment gap follows an autoregressive process of order 2. And finally, we estimate a Phillips curve in which the NAIRU follows a random walk and the unemployment gap depends on the Ocon gap. That is the Ocon's law. After all this, we obtain 2 labor market gaps. We estimate 2 labor market gaps, one using the traditional unemployment rate, another using the extended that includes the informal work. And we will evaluate the capability of predicting inflation in these 2 models. So these are the main results. Both measures of NAIRU, as we say, the NAIRU change in time, we allow for change in time. Both measures for NAIRU increase during the slight ingredient period of study. And the labor market slack measuring both indicators of labor on the utilization. So similar cyclical trends. So we cannot say that that we throw to the garbage one indicator. I mean, I think they both complement rather than we have to choose one or another. So both indicators of labor market utilization show similar cyclical trends, but there are some differences. According with the endogenous, we want to present the endogenous threshold model, the slack in the labor market estimated with an indicator that includes informality seems to predict better inflationary pressures during when the employment gap is close to 0. And these are these 2 differences. So these 2 marginal difference within these 2 indicators, where the first one is during the period 2007-2008, reflecting the labor market using alternative indicator, formality, anticipated better inflationary pressures identified during this period. Another is that in 2016, again, the extended unemployment indicator, the extended indicator of labor market underutilization, that includes informal workers, so a greater degree of slack than the traditional unemployment, which was consistent with the absence of considerable wage pressures observed during the period. So we conclude that both indicators could complement. If we want to go to the board, present a panorama of the labor market slack, it is important to present both. And according with the circumstances, we can, I think both indicators give relevant information. And so let's say we consider that this experience also could be useful for other countries with an important fraction of informal workers in the labor force. So first I'm going to present the modeling inflation data, the econometric methodology of inflation dynamics and NAIRU in Mexico. Then I'm going to present the main results. Then final remarks. And finally, something new that is measuring labor market slack during the pandemic. During the pandemic presented important challenges to the measure of informal labor. So you may be interested as well in to see how we deal at the Mexican Central Bank with the pandemic. This is not in the paper. I mean, the last section is not in the paper. This is the section 4 are new developments. Okay, so here's the data. The sample goes from January 2005 to December 2016. We have a monthly seasonal data. We use as a measure of inflation core inflation because it's less affected to supply shocks. We also we test different controls in our Phillips curve estimation, real effective exchange rate, import price index, price of oil, US CPI, and Mexican CPI telecommunications component. So those variables use these variables to control for supply shocks that in a developing country like Mexico have plenty of supply shocks, and this can affect the estimation of the Phillips curve. So we test for different effects. Finally, real effective exchange rate was the main variable, the variable that we use for control. Here the data, the unemployment rate, the traditional is the one that in Mexico the statistical institution follows the recommendation, the international recommendations. So the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed workers divided by the economically active population multiplied by 100. So that's the rate. This is nothing new here, but this is very important. The second, the extended measurement of employment under legislation. Here, you see, if the unemployment, the number of unemployed workers, I cannot point. The number of employment workers plus the number of informal wage workers divided by the economically active population. So how we measure informal workers, informal wage workers? So in Mexico, workers, there is an important fraction of self-employed workers, and also there are like subordinated wage workers. So we can divide workers in these two groups. In order to identify for this indicator, we use just subordinated workers that are informal. That means we don't consider the self-employed workers. Why is that? Because we consider that self-employed workers, many self-employed workers that are informal, they may be informal because they decide to be informal because they want to escape the regulation from the government, and they don't necessarily they can do very well in being informal. So we don't use the self-employed informal workers. So we concentrate in wage workers, and in the labor force study, we can see if informal, you can see if subordinated workers have, or wage earners, have the following mandatory benefits. Social Security, retirement benefits, home loan, or private health insurance. So we can observe this from the labor force survey, from the Mexican labor force survey. So if a worker that is wage earner, that is subordinated, and it doesn't have any of these benefits, doesn't have any one of these, we consider this worker as informal. It has at least one of these benefits. Generally comes in a package. So generally, some workers have Social Security, also have retirement benefits or home loan, or therefore, if the worker answer in the survey that has at least one of these benefits, we consider this worker as formal worker. So this is the way to identify informal work. So here we have a picture of the labor force, Mexican labor force service. This is for the fourth quarter of 2016. Now I have the arrow. Fortunately, I have the arrow so I can. Okay. So at this time, in the fourth quarter of 2016, according with the labor force survey, you have 54 million of economically active population. This is the 100%. From this, we have 3.5% that were unemployed, and employed were 96.5%. So this is the traditional measure of labor market. The labor force underutilization is 3.5%. But for the employed workers, we can divide informal, the employed workers in informal and formal, and also we have non-remunerated workers. So these do not report any wage, or maybe like family workers. But from the workers that report earn wage, monetary wage, 47.2% were informal, and 40.9% were formal. Here we include the full population. This is for urban and rural areas. If we use just urban areas, the percentage is like 50-50. In this case, we use the countryside, so it's almost 100%. Workers from rural areas are mainly, almost all informal. So that's why we have a higher number of informal workers. We use the full population. But if you see here, from the informal, we divided the wage earners, and at that time were 40.5 million. And that represented 26.8% of the population of the workers. This percentage is with respect with this total, okay, with this 54 million. Also, we have self-employed, and we have wage earners, formal wage earners, and formal self-employed. We divided self-employed just, we divided self-employed because self-employed. There is a question that asks the self-employed have a registered business, and so that's why we could divide self-employed between formal and informal. But we just use wage earners, because this reveals like a more disadvantaged job condition. Therefore, the new indicator that we propose is we add 26. We add 3.5, we add 26.8%, and this is around about 30% of the population of the 30% of the economically active population, 30%. This indicator is about 30% of the economically active population. So it's a big increase. You see, you have unemployed workers 3.5%. Informal wage earners is 36.8%. So these two represent more than 30% of the economically active population in Mexico. That means that 30% of the population in Mexico, the economically active population, shows these are in this new indicator of labor market underutilization. So you would say, okay, but Carlo, from 3.5% to more than 30% is a big increase. So that makes sense. That you say 30% of the population is of the 30% of the economically active population is come up with this indicator of labor underutilization. Is this right? So to answer this question, we see the case of South Africa. And this is interesting case to have a to say, this 30% makes sense or not makes sense. In South Africa, it's a developing country similar to Mexico. The economy of South Africa has a segmented labor market with an important fraction of its labor force outside the formal sector. However, there is a difference in South Africa and Mexico. Labor indicators from South Africa show a surprisingly low level of informality. If we saw only about 27% of the labor force in South Africa is classified as informal. And if you remember, in Mexico, it's like 57% of the labor force is classified as informal. So that's a very important difference between South Africa and Mexico regarding the informal fraction of informal work. On the other hand, unemployment in South Africa is close to 30%. That is very high for a developing country. You remember in Mexico, the unemployment rate is 3.5%. It's almost not. It's very, very low, very low. But some researchers have argued that in South Africa, many informal workers are categorized in the employment service as unemployed. So they work, but they are, let's say, they self-reported as unemployed. And this is the case for particularly more disadvantaged informal workers. And there is papers that show evidence of this. So in Mexico, is a guy that have a very precarious work when somebody comes to us and asks him, "Do you work?" And the Mexican says, "Yes, I work. I work cleaning mirrors on the street." But it seems that in South Africa, when you come and ask the worker if work, the guy that usually does this very precarious work says, "No, I don't work. I don't have work. I am unemployed. For me, being employed means a proper job." So maybe this is why the reason why the unemployment in South Africa is so big, 30%. The real thing is an important fraction of this 30%, and important proportion of this 30% are people that work in a very precarious job. And in Mexico, because some reason, when they ask if the person works or not, in Mexico they say, yes, I work. I sell on the street, I earn my money. And in Africa, South Africa, they say, I don't work. But if you see our measurement of labor market underutilization, that includes both unemployed workers and informal wage earners, fluctuates around 30%. That is very similar to the South Africa unemployment rate, which seems to include a fraction of informal workers. So these 30% that I chose here it makes sense if we compare this figure with the unemployed rate of South Africa. Any questions?
Yeah, Carlo, I have two questions. One, going back to an earlier slide of yours, you said you use core inflation. Is that like the traditional core? Are you excluding something, or what do you mean by core inflation? Is that without energy and food, or is this? Do you have a special measure of core inflation, or what does core refer to in this context?
Yes. Energy, fresh food that is more subject to supply shocks, and also in Mexico, core inflation excludes government tariffs. All the tariffs that are set by the government are not included in the core inflation. So core inflation, we tries to avoid to clean the effects of supply shocks.
Okay, thank you. Second question concerns and I don't want to do injustice to the Mexican social security system, but I remember reading that there's no unemployment insurance. Is that correct in Mexico?
Yes, there's not an employment insurance. Yes, I say that because yes, that is correct.
Is that explained by the fact that the unemployment rate is only 3.5%?
Yes, that's
okay.
Right. Mexico, there is not unemployment insurance. That means that unemployed becomes like a luxury. For example, if we compare the average education of unemployed and employed in Mexico, and employed including all of them, formal and informal, the education of the unemployed is much higher. So in Mexico, unemployed is like a luxury. Yes.
Yep. Okay. Thanks.
For a question? Okay. Here, a very important thing.
Sorry. Sorry, Carlo. There's another question.
Yes. Sorry. Good morning, Carlo. Yeah, I'm a colleague of Ole from the SEACEN Center. I would just like to request if you can go back to the slide where you showed the proportion of informal workers. In the case of, I think that's slide 8. Yeah, slide 8.
Yeah.
Yes. Just to have a quick, because in the Philippines, we also have a large informal sector, and usually these are household help, but they're trying to include them in the social security system, things like that. And so the relationship in the case of the Philippines is that the household head usually employs household help, which is part of the informal sector. Now, if the household head, let's say, loses his job, then he has to let go of his household help. So that's the kind of relation or the structure in the case of the Philippines. In the case of Mexico, these informal workers, which sectors actually dominate in terms of the composition of informal workers? Sorry, I think you might have discussed that earlier on, but I may have missed it. So
No.
yeah, if you can just give a bit of a more idea on what the composition of the informal workers are, that 47.2%. No? Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Sir, well, thank you for the question. Yes, in Mexico, there are a lot of workers that the working households.
So more or less, it's quite similar to the structure that the informal workers that we have also in the Philippines. So more or less, it's quite similar.
Yeah, informal workers are mainly in the service, mainly in service. Commerce, also workers that work for other households. They don't have, they are not registered. They are not registered in the Social Security. Now this is changing in Mexico. There are some schemes that allowed for workers that work in a household to be registered in the Social Security. But mainly, as you said, as in Filipinas, informal workers are mainly in the working in the service sector, working for other households, for street vendors, food,
Okay, yeah.
restaurants, small restaurants on the street, but also there are informal workers in big firms, because there are some firms that they do not register the workers in the security, they just register a fraction of the workers in the social security. Therefore, also there is a fraction of informal workers that work for formal firms.
I see.
But generally, are more prevalent informal workers in the service sector, commerce, restaurants, small business.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay. So an important thing is this indicator to work for us, it is important to be, as I said, counter-cyclical. And here we graph the continuous line. Here we have a time series from 2006 to 2016. We have the dotted line that is the output gap. And we have the continuous line that is informality rate. And here we see a clear counter-cyclical pattern. You see here we have some pressures in between 2005 and previous world financial crisis. We have a strong growth. And this mirror with a low informality rate, you see here. And then the crisis arrived, the output gap went down, and the informality rate went up. And this is a thing that we were talking about, that when the crisis arrived, unemployment increases, but not that much. Why it doesn't increase that much? Because many people cannot afford to be unemployed. So they go to the informal sector, informal labor. And that's why we see this increment in the informality rate during the crisis. And then when as the economy recovers, we see a clear reduction in the informality rate. So we see a clear counter-cyclical pattern as the unemployment rate with the informality rate. That suggests that our indicator could help us to have we can use this as an indicator of labor market flux. Now, I go to the econometric methodology. So the conceptual framework for estimating the NAIRU is based on the Phillips curve, which establishes that shows a negative link between inflation and unemployment gap. The third problem here is you have a inflation. This term here is the long run expected inflation. This is here is the employment gap. And we have delta and x is a matrix of contours I already mentioned. And of course, beta should be negative, as if the unemployment increases, inflation should go down, so beta is negative. And to estimate this, we rewrite this equation. We obtain equation 1. Here again, here it is change. We have change in inflation. We have the unemployment gap. Beta times the unemployment gap, and here we have lags of the of inflation and lags of the control variable. And here we have the error term. In order to estimate this equation, if we cannot estimate this equation, we do some changes to estimate this equation. We obtain the equation 2. And we write it, this is the intercept. The intercept plus beta ut, unemployment, could be unemployment, traditional or the alternative measure of unemployment. And here we have the lags inflation, lags deflation. And here we have the lags of control variables. And this term, here the intercept plus beta ut is this term here that we have in the previous equation. It's just rewrite the equation 1 and we obtain equation 2. But this equation here allows us to estimate with traditional least square estimators. We allow us to estimate the NAIRU. The NAIRU is minus alpha, this is the intercept, divided by beta. This is the estimation of the NAIRU. It comes just from rewriting the traditional physics curve. And here we don't have time. You see here we have a fixed NAIRU. And in order to have a variable NAIRU, we just estimate this equation for different periods of time. We depart from the same point and we add observations, and for each observation we add, we obtain a new NAIRU. So that's why here we have the variable NAIRU just by estimating this equation for different periods of time. Now I go to the state space specification. So we model NAIRU as an observed stochastic process, and where we assume that its determinants are unknown but persistent. That means that they follow random walk. First of all, we start with a NAIRU with random walk. So the evolution of the NAIRU is obtained from system of equations that is here, the system 3. Here, the first equation is the same that we have previously is equation 1, but we assume that the NAIRU follows a random walk. And here the rows are assumed to be IID, with a normal with median 0, and variance, constant variance, and are uncorrelated. The second model is a random walk and unemployment gap that follows an autoregressive process of order 2. So we add an equation to the previous system. This is the equation that we add here. The unemployment, the NAIRU is the same. It follows a random walk, but we add this that the unemployment gap follows an autoregressive process of order 2. Here there are 2 lags. And row 1 and row 2 are parameters that we can estimate from this system of equations. The third model is a random walk with NAIRU that follows a random walk with an unemployment gap that follows the Okun law. And so here we have again the same equation that the previous two, equation 1. But here and also we have this equation that the NAIRU follows around the world. And this is the additional thing. The output gap depends on the output gap. Sorry, the unemployment gap depends on the output gap. And we have we estimate this C is a parameter to be estimated, and again this parameter is assumed that follows at around the world, the same as the unemployment NAIRU. This parameter is assumed to follow around the world with the same assumptions of the previous two models. In this specification, we consider the output gap. This output gap enters as an exogenous variable, and it's estimated using the HP filter with a tail correction. All these three system of equations are standard, and we estimated them by maximum likelihood and common fit. Here are the results. Any question about the econometric procedure? Okay, I continue with the main results. For both measures of labor slack seems to be consistent with the economic cycle. The first we have the equation in the left-hand side is the NAIRU, the traditional. In the right-hand side, we have the NAIRU with informal workers. The NAIRU is this line, this continuous line here. Here, the dotted lines are the confidence intervals, and the white line is the observed. In this case, is the observed unemployment rate. In the left-hand side. In the right-hand side, the white line is the unemployment rate plus informal workers. So that's why you see here we have the NAIRU is around 4.5%, and in this case, the NAIRU is 37.5%. So this includes informal workers. But let's say the labor market slack that suggests these two indicators seems to be consistent. In fact, this is the first period when we saw a bit of tightness in the labor market from 2005 and 2008. Then the crisis arrived and we have slack, clear slack. And then in 2014, 2016, we have some evidence of pressure from the labor market. I would like to see some small differences that will not be relevant. Here, the NAIRU in the first period of 2005 and 2008, the NAIRU, alternative NAIRU that includes informal workers, the system somehow a higher tightness here in this part. And in the most recent, from 2014 to 2016, it seems that the traditional NAIRU showed like a lower level of tightness or lower level of labor market slack compared to the traditional. So there are two like marginal differences, but as we're gonna see, those differences are gonna be relevant. So which is more accurate? This one, the NAIRU, the traditional NAIRU that suggested like a higher level of tightness, or this one, the NAIRU, informal NAIRU. So now we have two measures of labor market kindness, but we wanted to show a statistical evidence to show some statistical evidence to evaluate which one is better. And the way to evaluate which one is better, well, is which one of these two labor market slack indicators or predict better inflationary pressures. So we develop a threshold regression model with two routines. Here we have routine 1, and then we have routine 2. Here we have as dependent variables in inflation. Here we have the traditional measurement of unemployment gap, the traditional, and this is the alternative with informal workers, that includes informal workers. So this is the traditional, and then it's just with unemployed, and this is the one that we are proposing in the paper, that is informal workers plus unemployed. And then we have the same variables that we have in the previous equations. Here are lags of inflation, and here we have lags of the control variables. And then in the regime 2, we have the same. You see, are the same variables. The same variables. But the difference between regime 1 and regime 2 is that regime 1 is active when the slack in the economy is below tau. When the slack in the economy is close to 0, you see, this is very important. Regime 1 is when the slack, I mean, when it's more important, you know, when the slack is close to 0, is active. This regime is active, and in the other case, in the regime 2, regime is active when the slack is above tau. And when we do this regime, well, you see here, going back to the previous slide, here there's a little doubt that there is slack. You see here, I mean, 2010, 2011, it's very clear that it was slack in the economy. So it doesn't matter if you see one or another measure of labor market slack. I mean, in the board, there is no doubt that there is a lot of slack in the economy. But the questions in the board and more were increased as the lag is approaching to 0. Then it is like even more relevant to know what is the labor market slack in the economy. So that's why we designed this threshold regression model with two routines. So the way to estimate this is to do thousands of regression. We like first we leave these four coefficients free. And the way to estimate this is we change tau. We are changing tau for all the possibilities, and we estimate the two regimes for all the possibilities, all the possibilities of tau. So we do thousands of regressions, and we use information criteria to decide which is the best model. So intuitively is the model that has R square higher. Then we decide the tau in the model that the model has higher R square. But information criteria also includes like a measure of complexity of the model. And so this is the way we estimate tau with the unrestricted model. And then what we do is to try to do like restrictions in these coefficients, in these four coefficients, and see which is the model that has that better fits the data with information criteria. So, any questions? Okay, and here in table 4, we presented threshold regression results. As you said, we restrict the coefficients for different options. We have possibilities. Just here we hope to represent just 4 possibilities. First is the regime that is unconstrained. So here we have the unemployment gap. Here you have the coefficient of the regime 1, the coefficient of unemployment gap, the traditional of regime 1, and here we have the coefficient of the extended unemployment gap and the regime 1. Remember, regime 1 is when the output gap is close to 0. Okay? This is regime 1. And here is the coefficient of regime 2 when the output gap is above this threshold. And here we have the unrestricted model. So we estimate this setting free the 4 coefficients. And by changing different possibilities of tau, we do thousands of regressions, and the tau that minimize the error is 2.35. So this is unrestricted. And here in the column 2, we restrict, you see here for the unemployment gap, the traditional to be 0 in the regime when the labor market gap is close to 0. And the regime 2 when the labor gap is above tau. We restrict the informal, our proposed measure of labor market crack 0. So, in other words, when the labor market crack is close to 0, we set free the coefficient for the external unemployment gap is 1. We estimate it. And when the output gap, when the unemployment gap is above tau, we set free the coefficient of the traditional unemployment gap. So here, that's why we estimate 2 coefficients. Here we see the information criteria that are the accurate information criteria, the Bayesian information criteria, and the Hannan-Finn information criteria. Lower the number, higher the better the fitness of the model. And here we see that this model, when we restrict the coefficients in this way, it seems that the model is better under these 3 information criteria. Does it better. And also, we estimate with these restrictions, the tau, the value of tau is 0.54. And then we do the same procedure for other possible combination of constraints. For example, this constraint you see here in the column 3. We said that the beta of the traditional unemployment gap is equal in both regimes, so that's why we estimate just 1, and we set the extended unemployment gap, we estimate 2, and so on. We do all the possible combinations, and the model that wins is this one, the number 2, the one that comes in the number 2. And we interpret this as when we have a difficulty, when the unemployment gap is approaching to 0, the better indicator of labor market slack is the external employment gap. This is the way we interpret it. Any question?
Carlo, are you? I may be ahead of you a little bit. Are you going to do a forecast sort of evaluation as well with the model or not?
Yes, we did it. We didn't see any significant difference between both models. So we did it, and we didn't see any important statistical difference forecasting. So what we decided is to instead to present the evidence of when I tell you not evident difference between these two indicators of labor market slack. So that's why we try with this threshold regression model to see how our indicators of labor market slack predict inflation by when the slack is close to zero. That is, we compare these two. So yes, that is the answer. Not significant difference when we want to forecast inflation during the full period of study between these two indicators.
Did you also try a sort of a weighted average of all four measures or something, or did that have any effect?
What do you mean weighted average of these two indicators, or put in different weights? No, we didn't try that.
Or just sort of an average of all four gap indicators.
Yes, I understood. Yes, this is important. This here, you see here we have here the average. You see here we have the average of these four indicators.
Okay,
and these are unweighted. Mm-hmm. So here we present the average of these these four estimations of labor market slack, and those were unweighted. Just the average. And we did average, and see we obtained this graph from the average of these four measurements of the NAIRU. Yeah, it wasn't weighted, so we could try to see a difference between these three models and try to take advantage of this. Yes, but we didn't do it. So we took the average.
Okay, thanks. There's another question about that tail correction to the Hodrick-Prescott filter. Can you tell us a little bit more how that works and how this is different to, say, a one-sided HP filter?
Yes, this is the conventional tail correction method. We use it for both, like symmetric for both sides. We didn't try for different specifications actually.
Thanks.
Okay. Other questions?
There's a question about the estimation of the threshold regression. Would a threshold VAR make any difference?
Say it again. Can you repeat the question?
How was the threshold regression model estimated? I think you said maximum likelihood and the Kalman filter or something. Would a threshold vector autoregression make any difference?
I didn't try. Here, this one. Okay. There are two. All these models, the 1, 2, and 3, we estimated them with maximum likelihood. But this one here, we just we estimated this. We estimated all the possible possibilities for the threshold, and we choose the threshold that minimizes the error. And then to compare the different restrictions, we use this information criteria methods. Yeah, and we didn't try with other. We didn't through alternative, we didn't test for alternative ways to estimate this, to estimate this model. We just use the maximum likelihood, but there are other options. Now with the pandemic, we are using a Bayesian estimation, and that seems to work better, especially to deal with the shock, the huge shock from the pandemic. But yes, I mean, there are other options. There are alternatives to estimate the gap. But in this case, we just use maximum likelihood. But I would like to say also that if we estimate this, instead to use these three models, use four models and take the average, we did the same just using the one model, for example, the Bayesian model, and let's say the main conclusions were similar. So the model we choose here to estimate the unemployment gap, I mean, we estimated with different models, and the results were robust.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, another question? So here, in the threshold regression model, we graph the square of the traditional employment gap. We graph this the indicator that help us to see to compare with the tau and see if we are in one regime or another, the square of the unemployment gap. So here we graph the square of employment gap, and we draw a line here. The dotted line is when tau is is 0.54. Here we see when the square of employment gap is below the dotted gap, means that the alternative measure of unemployment gap that includes informality works better when it's below, and when it is above, the traditional measure of unemployment gap seems to predict better inflation. And here we have a case of study for you that we have this like need to answer questions in the particular questions during the time the board asks. There are some questions that arise. But here we have a case of study that goes for the fourth quarter of 2014 to the fourth quarter of 2015. And here during this period, when we were going to the board, we were showing that our indicators of labor market slack, such as tightness. You remember here in this graph, we started to show tightness two indicators, but wages. We didn't see inflationary pressure, wage pressure during this period, and also we didn't see also inflationary pressure during this period. So we wanted, it was like a bit of a puzzle. We started to see like a bit of tightness in the labor market, but we didn't see pressures, wage pressures, or and also we didn't see inflationary pressures. yeah. So we wanted to solve this puzzle. What was happening in the Mexican labor market at the time? And here in the right-hand side, we have two graphs. We estimated the input gap, but for sector, we have the mining sector, tertiary sector, and secondary sector, that is mainly industry and manufacturing. So and here we see that it seems that the pressure in the open gap was mainly in the tertiary sector, in the sector that service sector. But in the secondary sector that was mainly manufacturing, we saw like quite a lot of slack. So although we started to see pressures in the economy started to grow higher, the main engine of the economy at that time seems to be the tertiary sector. You see here we have some pressures here. And the tertiary sector, as we already mentioned, is where the informal sector prevails. And here we see in the graph below, where we have the informality rate by sector, we see that secondary sector, that tertiary sector has a much more fraction of formal workers, you see, than secondary sector. So what happened during this time, 2014, 2016, was although the employment started to grow, and we saw a bit of more economic growth as well. The tertiary sector, the main engine of the Mexican economy at that time, was mainly tertiary sector, that is where the informal workers prevail and where the low wages prevail. And this is consistent with a slack. You see here we have the slack, the traditional, or alternative measure of slack, show a lower degree of slack compared to the traditional. We interpret this as the kindness of informal labor. It seems that in this particular period came from employment that was generated in the tertiary sector, that was mainly informal sector. Therefore, although we saw evidence of tightness in the labor market, we didn't observe informal wage inflation, and this is consistent with the difference in between these two indicators. So in this particular time, we consider that our alternative measurement of informal labor, that includes the alternative measure of labor market gap, that includes informal labor, seems to show a more realistic situation of the labor market at this particular time. Any questions? So, yeah, so in this period 2016 economic, we saw a lot of employment generation, but this increment in the labor was mainly from the tertiary sector, where the informal sector prevails. So finally, the remarks of this this work is that we cannot cut any of these measures. I think both measurements of labor market slack are important, and depending on the circumstances, we can go, I mean, the board could use the information of both indicators. Any question? Olea, how many minutes I have?
Timing is perfect. We have about 13 minutes. If there are any remaining questions, so let me turn it over to the participants.
Yes. If there's any remaining question. Also,
either
I later talk about the labor market crash during the pandemic, but this is very short. But it's better if you have some additional question of the paper.
So either unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to, if you prefer the chat box, please feel free to send your questions in the chat box. But so in terms of that previous observation, that your preferred measure was kind of indicating things beforehand. So this is, this is the sort of usefulness for monetary policy in terms of being aware of the labor market tightening up ahead of any sort of official measures.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is in the developing countries that more interesting. We cannot look just at the informal and the unemployment rate. So the board is constantly looking at informal wage generation of formal employment that comes from the statistics of the Social Security. So the board needs to see a wide range of labor market indicators, and this is permanent. This is permanent. You have to interpret these indicators depending on the circumstances of each period. If you see the minutes of the board, they look at many different indicators. So this is the main measure that is for developing countries. We have to look at more indicators. We have to get on the macro data. Macro data is very important. It's very important to know, to manage to deal with the labor force survey and to come up with different indicators that could be useful for the board to make the decision. So here in the Mexican Central Bank, we don't rely just on the official unemployment rate coming from the national statistics. We also have to look at the macro data, and depending on the circumstances, look at all different indicators. The macro data give us the flexibility to react to different circumstances. In this case, for example, for the pandemic, was very important to all these infrastructure to use the macro data to come up with responses to the board. So we have to use macro data from labor force surveys, from also from administrative records, Social Security records. We use all these databases to give information to the board. And in this particular case of the informal labor market, that was an indicator that was permanent. They was used for many years as a complement of the traditional indicators.
Of course, you also have a, I mean, I never think about this, but of course you also have this big challenge that if I think of the Mexican informal labor market, wages may be more flexible, but of course, as you showed us, the informal labor market is bigger than the formal labor market. At the same time, you have the formal labor market where wages may be more sticky, but it's smaller than the informal one. So, you have to think about these sort of different dimensions, which I think makes it more complicated than, this sort of German labor market, which is all regulated and it's all formal and sort of stuff like that. So, I think the measures you propose, I mean, which is why I like the paper. I think the measures you propose may be extremely helpful in this regard.
Yes, exactly. We have more fun here. We are more action, no? more things that we have to look at.
Yep.
For example, the difference between wage differences in formal and informal also could be an indicator, because when the indicator of the economic cycle, because informal wages are more flexible during the crisis, there are downward liquidities in the formal sector, but those liquidities do not exist in the informal sector. So wage difference also could reveal very interesting things throughout the economic cycle. For this, we have to look at the labor force survey and all this is very, very interesting information that we can use for what the board can use to make the decisions.
Yeah. Fantastic. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. I mean, I don't see anyone who's unmuted him or herself. So shall I let you, Carlos, shall I let you either go home and have dinner, or have dinner and then go home, or something, or?
I can use the 5 minutes to talk about these new developments of the labor market collected in the pandemic.
Sure.
You see here we have the evolution of the labor market during the pandemic, and there were very, very unusual developments that you may, I don't know you guys if you have seen things in your country, but this was incredible. You see here we have the unemployment. Here you have just million of people. We have unemployment population. Here we have the shock of the pandemic. I mean, we barely see any. Well, of course, we saw an increment in the unemployment population, but wasn't very that important. And this also highlights the need to look at other indicators. And what we see here is the employee workers during the pandemic reduced a lot. The employee workers went from 45. Let me see. Went from the employee population reduced 10 million people, and non-economically active population increased a lot. You see, increases at almost 10 million, the same. The thing is, during this crisis or traditional, all tools didn't work, because people that lose a job, and normally they have the option in a normal cycle, they have the option to go to the informal labor. During the pandemic, they didn't have this option. They had to stay home, and that was a huge crisis from the social crisis, because these guys didn't have any unemployment insurance, didn't have support from the government. They have just to leave the labor force and stay at home. So here we see the not formal and informal workers. In this particular case, during the pandemic, or indicator of informality didn't work, and we have to adapt to it, because you see, the informal workers contracted much more than the formal. This is for first time in the whole history of Mexico. They didn't have the option to escape. The formal workers that do the job, they couldn't go to the informal sector because you have to stay home. So you cannot go and sell things on the street. You cannot go to sell to the market. You cannot go open the family business because it was everything closed. So if we see here on the right-hand side, informality rate, normally, as we saw, this informality rate that is clearly counter-cyclical. During the pandemic, the informality rate reduced to, was the highest reduction in all the history of Mexico. So again, this implies they have to adapt to the new circumstances. This pandemic was a real shock for the economy from a social point of view, and also for us that we want to make sure that we need to present the ball with a reliable vision of the situation. We couldn't use the informality rate because informals, they went to non-economically active populations. See, increased it a lot. They didn't work. They didn't look for a job. And we had to react and to learn this very quick to say, listen, although the unemployment rate barely grow, the problem in the labor market is huge. The slack is huge. So this is what I wanted to say. And we have a box in the inflation quarterly report that will explain how we will deal with this. Maybe we can make a paper and we can present it later. But how we deal with this and how we manage to come up with an alternative measure of informality gap to present a realistic situation of the Mexican labor market during the pandemic. And for this, was very important to use the macro data coming from the study. That's all. Another question?
No, I was just going to say, obviously these are amazing charts in terms of, it also shows the resilience of the informal labor sector. The sort of vibrancy of the informal labor sector in Mexico. I think that's sort of a really eye-opening for me. But this has been great, Carlo and Anna. Thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know how you do this. I had a quick look at the BIS website today, and you've written another two or three papers I've seen, which have now come out. So no wonder you're in the office at 10:30 p.m. on a Monday. So fantastic. Let me thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a wonderful presentation, really thought-provoking. Sort of covering everything. Interesting macroeconomic problem, interesting macroeconomic techniques, great estimation results, great estimation techniques. So a little bit of everything for everyone. So thank you. Please, everyone, have a look at the paper. It's as I said, I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's a paper I like a lot, and I'm going to continue advertising it. So, Carlo, thank you so much. Muchas gracias, and hope to see you or one of your colleagues soon. We have an Asian focus here, but of course there are other parts of the world that grapple with similar problems. And I do know that Mexico is in Central America, so I'm not going to say Latin America. I'm going to say Central America. Many countries in Central America grappling with the same problem, and it was really illuminating for me. So thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you to Yassir for organizing this, and thanks everyone for asking questions. And see you soon.
See you.
Bye, Carlo. Bye, Anna.
Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you all of you. Thank you. Bye.